everyone. Thanks for being here, despite the rain and the crappy weather in London. And Sarah, thank you so much for flying all the way.
Well, I mean, yeah.
And being here. Just very quickly, we have Sarah Welsh from HANX, co-founder, Farah Kabir, co-founder of HANX, and Roger Hassan, one of their investors. I'm super excited actually to be here today because, like Greta mentioned, this is one of those topics that gets a lot of airtime, but not a lot of actionable points. And I'm just gonna actually have a seat. A few months ago, in a very desperate attempt to calm my daughter down, I made her watch Ratatouille, the movie. And as I was watching it,
one of my favorites.
Brilliant. As I was watching it, I didn't realize the similarities between the movie and what it takes being a minority entrepreneur. Especially when, one of the quotes from the movies emphasizes Anton Ego's epiphany, where he talks about what a time to actually lose the actual punchline. This is just...
it's worth it.
It's worth it. Not everyone can become an artist, but a great artist can come from everywhere.
Yeah.
It is so true, and it could not be more truer, when you talk about minority entrepreneur, because in principle, while that works, it actually doesn't really work in reality. Because yes, you can come from anywhere, but there aren't enough opportunities, there aren't enough platforms where that can be highlighted and enough people given that opportunity of spotlight to shine. There's a lot of struggles and barriers, which we'll talk about. A departure from our traditional way of doing a panel. I don't want this to be a panel and then we sort of end with a Q&A. I'd rather, this be a very interactive, immersive discussion. So if anyone actually has some points, comments, please raise your hands. This could be a great discussion to see what solutions can actually be brought into this space. And I think that's where the real opportunity lies, because there's enough talk about what's not being done and very little solutions put into action. Farah, Sarah, off to you guys in terms of starting with intros, but I really would like for you to share your journey. What was sort of the impetus in starting this brand? But more than that, what was the dinner table conversation when you both said you're leaving your careers to start a company, far as in your own word, selling luxury condoms and lubricants?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming this evening. We're super excited to share our story and get you guys involved. Sarah and I are actually childhood friends, so we grew up together. We went to school together, we couldn't keep away from each other, we went to university together, where I studied finance and I then went into investment banking. So I was at Goldman Sachs for just under 7.5 years. And it was during that time, went out on my lunch break to buy some condoms because it does that from the office, a bright red pack in my hand. My boss was behind me in the queue. And I was absolutely mortified that he'd seen me with these condoms on my lunch break thinking, is she promiscuous? Who is she going to hanky-panky with? And that embarrassment soon turned into frustration. Because actually, I don't feel embarrassed to take control of any other aspect of my health. But when it comes to sexual health, it's still really taboo. And when you go down the condom aisle, products are garishly packaged, promoting a man's conquest, with names like Trojan or Johnny Big Boy, and garishly, brightly coloured package. So after this awkward bump in, I was actually sitting down with Sarah. We had a late lunch, probably with a couple of bottles of wine, I'd say, when we were discussing this bump in and how the market hadn't changed. And it was during that time, with your experience as a gynecology doctor, and I'll let Sarah take over.
So hi, I'm Sarah, the other half of the co-founding team. So as Farah said, we were having this lunch, and at the time I was working, so I studied medicine, and I was working in gynecology, and sexual health was kind of my special interest. So I was seeing a lot of women in clinics, coming in with irritation or infections, recurrent STIs, huge taboo around the topic of sexual wellness as a whole, and a lot of misinformation and poor education. So Farah was telling me about this awkward bump in she had, and I was saying actually there's such a gap in kind of brands and knowledge, and as women in particular, we really care about what goes on in our bodies. So our skincare regimes, our health, our fitness, our nutrition. But actually, we'd never look at the back of the lubricant packet and study the ingredients or look what's in the condoms. So we felt actually that should change. And really, there hadn't been any kind of innovation in this space for decades. So we got very excited. As Farah said, had a few wines. So got very carried away with this idea, even thought of the name that first night. But we thought, before we put our life savings into buying whole load of condoms and or quit our jobs, we need to really make sure there's a market here. So we kind of surveyed over 2,000 women and see what they wanted out of the product and if there was a real market here. So yeah, I guess initially condoms, lubricants, but we've moved more into intimate wellness as a whole. So we sell pharmacy products through a third-party pharmacy. That was kind of brought out through COVID. So yeah, lots of exciting things in the pipeline, but the kind of whole ethos around the brand and the company is really making the world stop being a bit weird about our sex lives and making sexual wellness, sexual health, at the forefront.
So why HANX? Why the name HANX?
Farrell's already said thank you, but we used to say, it was actually Farrell's dad, because we went to school together. If he dropped us off for like a night out in town or something, he would be like, no, thank you. It's an Indian accent, so we all just used to joke about it.
I don't think he has any idea that that's what we called it HANX.
Yeah, it just stuck and actually, we all stuck.
Yeah, it's a very catchy name actually. So Farah, what was it like starting this? You know, when we talk about minority in terms of gender, in terms of giving up a stable paycheck, you know, telling this to your South Asian parents, what was it like? When you talk about like minorities and saying gender, religion, ethnicity, like you tick all the boxes.
Yeah, there's not a box I don't tick, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like an episode of EastEnders Omnibus on Christmas Day when I told my family that I was leaving banking to set up what was initially a condom company. And I think they thought that London made me crazy. And you know, I come from a Bangladeshi Muslim background, 2 older brothers and a sister, and my family are all quite entrepreneurial in their own right, and they all have businesses. So most years at Christmas, it's usually, so there's a property, there's a commercial opportunity here, are you interested? And I was honestly quite happy making mistakes in somebody else's firm and staying at Goldman. But this one year they asked me, and by this point we'd had a few months and we'd done the research, and I said, well actually, Sarah and I have a great idea. All hell broke loose. So it was like, my mum was like, there's something in the London water, let's get you back up north. My brothers were like, oh my God. And my dad was like, you're definitely not gonna get married off now, selling condoms and leaving banking. So that was quite funny. But actually, they understood the fact that it's a women's health problem and a need. And it doesn't matter what race, religion, culture, gender you are, it's something that applies to everyone. And they were super supportive eventually. And I think, coming back to your other question about the challenges of therefore building a company like this, to be honest, I thought it would be quite straightforward, especially with a finance background and quite plain sailing. The reality is, being a woman of colour, female founders, despite having amazing knowledge, mine from the commercial side and Sarah being a gynecology doctor at the forefront of what we're doing, is still being incredibly challenging. And I think you can see that in the stats. I think this year it's now been less than 2 pennies for every pound of VC investment in the UK actually goes to female founders. So there's still a lot we can do.
So Roger, coming to you, as an investor, was the fact that they're women or a minority or different ethnicities, was that part of the decision making for you at all? Or at what stage did you enter their fundraising journey?
I think the first call that I had with Farah, I sort of thought, hang on a minute, you're selling a product that fundamentally men wear. It's a man's choice to put it on, and you want to try and position it in the way you're positioning it. And I remember the conversation, I was like, I'm not sure you earn the right to be able to tell me what to wear. And the conversation still went incredibly well, and Farah pitched her heart out and made a big impact to me. So later that day I spoke to my wife Grace about the conversation, and her eyes just lit up. She was just like, what? Tell me, right, okay, show me the deck. Right? So we sat and went through, and I tried very ham-fistedly to explain what Farah had explained to me, and she was like, you're an idiot. What do you mean? I said, what happened with Hayden a few years ago? So our eldest son, he was just beginning his intimate journey in life with his girlfriend at the time, and he sat down with me. We have a very open relationship, and he said, Dad, Anne and I are thinking about, Okay, yes, yeah, I know. So, we had the conversation, and he sort of said to me, he said, well, I should, what should I do? I said, well, first of all, you use some condoms, don't you? He said, yes, I do. He said, where do I get it? He said. And I mean, don't forget, he was nearly 18 at this point, right? So I said, well, you just go down to Sainsbury's, it's at the bottom of the road. You'll okay. And he psyched himself up and off he went. And he had what I can only describe as a very extreme version of the experience that Farah had. She was in that boot store and bumped into a co-worker, but every time he went into the aisle, somebody else was there. And he couldn't bring himself to go to the shelf, and he came home empty-handed. He said, Dad, I couldn't do it. I said, what do you mean you couldn't do it? As if you can't do that, why the hell are you doing the other thing? If you don't have the courage to go and do that, then how are you going to have the courage to do like 3 a.m. night feeds? Because that's basically what you're playing with here, right? Get yourself back down there and don't even think about coming back without what is necessary. And he did. Grace reminded me of this, and she said, now imagine that was Olivia, right? So our elder daughter. And she said, wouldn't you want something better for her? Like, wouldn't you want something that actually empowers her and makes her feel like she can make that decision? And she's not skulking around in that aisle waiting for it to be empty when she finally goes, yes, that's what I need, and hurries off and she buys, extra large Trojans or whatever they are, by mistake. And the penny dropped. And I went, oh shit, yeah. Now, the reason why that story is relevant is because it highlights two things. Number one, as a male, at that stage, 40-something investor, operator turned investor, but still an investor, I really missed the nature of the problem, right? I really missed it. And this is true of so many, particularly institutional investors. It's typically white guys looking at white guy problems, startups founded by other young white guys, right? And they go, I agree with that problem, I see that problem, I understand it. And I'm going to back it. This is why 15-minute grocery delivery companies have raised so many hundreds of millions. Ha ha ha. The reality is that is, people looking for things that they understand and know and putting money behind those things rather than really understanding genuine problems that other people have. That's thing number one. Thing number two is that this whole area is still such an unexplored, undiscovered, misunderstood, as much as we believe ourselves to be a very liberal, society that's willing to talk and be open about people's sexual activities, the reality is there is still a huge barrier there. And until we're willing to really look objectively at ourselves, we'll never make good decisions as investors. That's a circuitous route to come back to your actual question, which was the fact that the founding team was all female, did have an influence on my decision, not once I'd worked out what the problem they were solving was. And that was the problem. The barrier was the fact that I didn't really get the problem in the first place. And once I got the problem, Farah could have been anybody, doing anything, and I would have understood it. And the reality is that we all have to be really objectively looking at our own biases and our own understanding of the world if we're going to make good investment decisions.
100%. That's actually one of the most common struggles I find with minority founders, right? The fact that they're often pitching a product in a sector, in a location that majority of the people don't get. I'll talk about this to anyone who's willing to listen to me, even the guy on the street. But there's a reason for this, and I think the solution to this problem, is to have better education for the people to have investors from these underrepresented communities, because they're the only ones who actually get the problem. Your wife was the wiser one.
Yep.
Who
Always
made
is.
you see the light.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, you were able to relate it, and that's the key.
Yep.
And it's the relatability that is harder to get. And in those 5 minutes of pitches, how does one make that work? How did you guys make that work? Because
we wouldn't say
launching a startup is hard, but raising capital is even harder.
Yeah.
And like I said, you tick all those boxes that make it harder and harder and harder. So how do you overcome that then?
So genuinely taking no for an answer. So persistence. Poor Roger was sick of it by the second call. Thankfully, his wife turned up and announced. I was like, Roger, you're mad. Listen to these girls.
How did you meet Roger? Was it just cold emails and
Dave,
messages?
Yeah, Dave Nolan, who's a co-founder of Butternut Box, who is good friend, mentor, and has built an amazing consumer business.
Yeah.
And our conversations are usually pretty short and pretty direct. And it's usually, here's a problem, Dave, did you like this solution? The solution was, you need to meet Roger ASAP. So we met Roger, and Roger's actually our chairman as well, so he is very much involved in the business. So a lot of persistence, getting out there, speaking to as many people that will listen, not taking no for an answer, but there are no's if there's no's. Who else does, shouldn't be speaking to if it's a no from that person? And getting those people to introduce us to other people. But it is time consuming.
In the audience, I'm going to pick on you right tomorrow. You are actually another one of HANX's investors. How did you guys meet and what made you invest in them?
They're my first investment. I'm a VC focused on female-led technology companies, and I invested in them because my thesis was built around women's health and sustainability, and HANX are pretty much bang on the sweet spot. They're building sustainable condoms, targeting women, targeting women's health. I don't know if anyone's read Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. It's a fantastic book about building startups, and one of the things that he hones in on is building around taboos, and actually that's where you can have massive, massive success. And sexual wellness, as has been said on the panel already, is a massive taboo in our society, and I think it's something that we haven't quite grappled with, similar to mental health. Already knew that there was an opportunity there, met the founders, thought they were extremely high caliber, loved the product, loved what they were building, so that was my first deal.
And the fact that they were minority women, does that play anything?
Well, I invest in female founders, that's my thesis.
But you said tech focused, they're not a tech company.
D2C though.
Okay.
Tech enabled.
Tech enabled, okay.
Yeah, tech enabled. And I started with a focus on consumer and tech, and now we're more focused on technology, but they're still direct to consumer and tech enabled fundamentally. And my thesis around women was more just that I was looking at macro trends of interesting startups with a view of becoming a founder, specifically in women's health and sustainability, and wasn't coming at it because there was a lack of capital. I just thought there were amazing businesses being built.
This is for you, but Roger and sort of any other investors in the crowd here, how much is resilience and mental health of these founders an important aspect when you invest in them? Because when you talk about, the struggles of fundraising, starting or launching a startup, you've got to be really resilient, and you should be able to take the punches. For you and I, we've talked about this many, many times, because it's so important to also look at founders in that, and especially when you're in the industry, which is a taboo industry, you've got even more hurdles to jump through, right? It's literally a performance and you have to keep going. So how much of that factors into your decision?
It's one of the key we invest early stage, so it's one of the key things that we look for. Resilience, grit, an unstoppable drive, and just having that real vision for a business, but that you've got to have, you've got to be better, you've got to be stronger. There are more barriers, it's fundamental. You've got to be able to take the notice. We're fundraising right now. It's not easy.
Yep.
We're 2 female partners raising for women. So it's very much double-sided, but if you want to be a change maker, it's not going to be easy, right?
Right, no, completely. And I mean, given their educational backgrounds and professional sort of experience, it speaks for it, right? Because if you don't have the resilience, I don't know how you become a gynecologist, because it's such a specialized field, right? Just beyond becoming a GP. I got rejected from Goldman Sachs twice in my interviews. I never got through. Merrill Lynch eventually took me, but you made it through Goldman Sachs. Their interview process is rigorous enough. The resilience speaks for itself, but a lot of female founders, a lot of minority especially, struggle with that. It's tough. I mean, you must have seen this even as an operator, right?
Absolutely. I mean, resilience is one of the central factors that I always look for. Once I get the vision, typical investment process is, do I think this product needs to exist? First of all, does it have to exist in the world in some dimension? If the answer to that is yes, even if I see a product that I believe needs to exist, if the founding team, the phrase I use is hustlers with heart, they have to be willing to do all sorts of crazy things, be super resilient. I basically, fundamentally am a hustler. That's how I got into, I'm a pretty unconventional investor in that respect. I didn't go to university, haven't been in investment banking or consulting or whatever else. I started off working in a warehouse at 16. My own experience of getting to a point where I grew large businesses, sold large businesses, IPO businesses, was that all of the hustle that I learned was absolutely applicable, and then some, in all of the subsequent things that I did. So I look for hustlers that then also, because that can also end up being toxic if it's not managed in some way. So they need to have hustle, and they need to just be genuinely empathetic and really care about the good that they're doing in the world, the good that they're doing with their team, the things that they're bringing to the fore. And once Grace had helped me spot the vision with HANX, I mean, I saw that in bags in Farah and Sarah, and all of the ventures in my portfolio share that. One of the things that is actually harder for female founders is to get that sense of hustle across. The difference that I see primarily between being pitched by a 25-year-old business school grad who's, gone to a great uni and he's, maybe done a couple of years of consultancy and whatever, and an equivalent female founder that comes and pitches me is that the guy will just be much more willing to tell the world all of the amazing, incredible things he can do. He'll be much more willing to just say, I probably can't do all this, but I'm going to fake the hell out of it to tell you what you want to hear. And many of the female founders that I speak to are less intent on that and are more kind of like, I think we can do it and I believe in myself, but getting that sense of real, I'll blow the competition out of the way and I'm just going to own this space, happens much less often with female founders that I speak to. It didn't happen in Farah's case, I have to say. But in many cases it does happen. Often that's sadly the way we're raised. I see that in my own children, even in the way they're taught at school and their sort of role models and who they look up to. Ultimately, getting that sense of resilience, that hustle with a heart is central to all of my investment decisions.
So you've specifically said you didn't see that in Farah, but Farah, I'm gonna ask you something, and I think it might mirror some of my experiences. So, you come from an immigrant family. There's no real way that you can not lose per se, but there's just no way. Like, you just have to get it done, right? Like, there's a lot of people here that do come from immigrant backgrounds, and there's always that thing that, like you say, hustle with a heart. But you have to, Roger just said that there's oodles and oodles of that in you. Did that play at all when you see your parents being immigrant parents, or I don't know if they were first generation, second generation, but I saw that in mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there is no chance to fail, especially when you're doing something as bold.
Bold
as
as
that,
exactly.
A sexual wellness company from very traditional investment
There's no
banking.
way to come back
Correct.
home and be like, oh, this didn't work now.
You absolutely can't. And I think Sarah and I actually felt the same. It's like we went to school together and we were quite competitive when it came to A levels and university and whatnot. But it was equally the same thing for you, I think, as well. Going to do something so bold and so out there is literally no opportunity. You have to prove. When I was telling my brother more about HANX, Sarah was with me and he said to me, can I be really honest because I love you? My brother's very protective. He said, don't think it's going to work and I don't think you should leave your job. Your really well paid job, I don't think you should leave. Like, that's just my gut. And I said, and you were there on it, and I said, this is amazing, I can't wait to sit down with you on this sofa a year later and prove to you that I'm going to do this, that we're going to do this and build an amazing company. And it's having that sort of fire and that gumption, which you do get from, I certainly got it from my parents. They came to the UK in the 60s. My mum had 3 jobs, 5 kids. She was a cleaner in the morning and then working at the chocolate factory and then working at my dad's restaurants. The hustle is there and it's innate and you don't have that option to fail.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely can relate to that, and that's the when I was saying the hurdles to jump. But regardless, I grew up in Canada, I've lived in the US and now in the UK. Regardless of where you go, it's like a common red thread in pretty much any minority you find, because most of them tend to come from immigrant backgrounds. So it's kind of the same stories that you keep hearing and hearing, where it's like you see your parents do so much and then when you go out and do it, like there's just really no other way to come back home and kind of fail. And that's why I think it makes you more resilient. I think it makes you a little bit more, like you just said, the extra mile you go to prove yourself. And I think that's what contributes to the resilience as well, when you say you can't take no for an answer, because then you just have to become resourceful. If you can't go through the front door, you have to create back doors. And that's just how you do it. Currently, how many investors do you guys have? And was it mostly all through warm intros, cold intros?
What we did find is a lot of our angel investors were customers. And people were reaching out to us and saying, are you taking investment? Or I'd love to hear more about brands. And that's really exciting because they're our early adopters and essentially they're the ambassadors that speak and live and breathe the brand. And so I think that's been really helpful. And equally, we spoke to VCs early on and we still continue to engage with them. And even partners at VC firms, if we don't put their thesis, have also then invested because they see the potential and have personally come in and put in angel tickets. So it's definitely been a combination of word of mouth, but having a really strong, amazing brand that is real and relatable, it doesn't gloss over the realities of being a woman in the modern day. People can see that. Even yourself, Farouk, you mentioned you loved the brand and you saw it on Instagram and that's what resonated with you, the fact that it was relatable.
What about the actual treatment by investors between the two of you? Was it equal or was it really, really different?
I think mainly equal, but Farah does lead on the investment raise, so I'll maybe come in maybe a little bit later stage with a key investor want to meet the other co-founder. But I mean, there's been a real rocky ride over the years with investors and kind of responses and kind of really, really disgusting responses from some people. But like Farah said, we've got amazing angels and investors on board on our cap table, and actually people who are open-minded and understand the problem. There's that perseverance, but then sometimes you just know if someone's not going to get it, there's no point in continuing with them.
In terms of the product, what did you feel that you wanted when you started HANX? What did you feel was like one or two key attributes that you wanted differently for your products versus the ones that are available?
Of course, good question. The two key things: kind to the body and kind to the planet. So sustainability, a lot of the big brands out there don't really think about the sustainability aspect. There's a lack of vegan options, for example. You wouldn't really think condoms would need to be vegan, but the natural form latex is, vegan, of course, it's from a plant. But the way that they process it, and a lot of the big companies, they add casein, which is animal byproduct. So we remove that, used a plant-based alternative. Our packaging is as sustainable as possible. The latex itself is biodegradable. So kind of really thinking about the sustainability was a key thing, and consumers really kind of do engage with that, and they can see through people that are not. And the other part is the kind of kind to the body. So really, again, like women coming into clinics are seeing irritation from products they were using, such as anaesthetics and spermicides and things in condoms specifically, and lubricants that caused recurrent thrush or irritations, and actually they didn't know what it was in these products. Kind of thinking it from a vaginal health perspective as well, which a lot of the big brands hadn't done. So kind of those are two kind of key things within the product. Obviously, Farah's mentioned a lot about the brand, and the brand is really key here, but in terms of the product itself.
We've got actually one question, Manish at the back.
So you've met a whole bunch of angel investors or so. And what's the topic here is how is minorities treated in investment. Did you find any investors more open to you? Did you find minority male guys better, minority females, or was there any sort of investor who looked at you more favourably?
It's a good question. I suppose kind of the flip to what Roger was saying, in that he didn't really understand the problem as a man. A lot of female investors did understand the problem quite quickly, so perhaps that worked in our favour.
Right.
And obviously people like Samira, really focusing on that kind of female-founded companies. Certain investors are really keen to support minority founders.
Yeah, and I think also we found that of the male investors, it was like you said, once you thought it through again and you speak with your wife, that you realise the problem. And actually, a lot of male investors either have daughters or sisters, and they want a future where they're going into this and don't have to have the same problems that we've had. So I think it's investors who understand or can relate to the problem of gender.
So when we talk about VCs, there's such an egalitarian issue here as well, where a lot of investment is either made into female or minorities just to meet quotas, right? Nanish, you're from the family office world. Is there a conversation like that? Because it's very prevalent in like the VC space, right?
Well, VCs have got boxes to tick with their LPs. Family offices, again, each one's different, but no, I don't think any family office thinks in that manner.
So much more open.
I entered venture quite late in my career, so 20 years total career. I was probably 10 or 11 years in before I entered anything like the startup or venture space. And like I said, didn't go to university, have no MBA, have no credentials that anybody, I worked in warehouses. I worked, I was a general manager in large logistics operations, and I got my break in through a company who was scaling big operations.
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to be, commercial enough and driven enough and hungry enough to want to go and make an impact. And for the first few years in that space, I definitely felt like I was at a disadvantage, because every other person that was being brought into that venture at that point had an MBA, was an ex-McKinsey consultant, ex-Bain consultant. There were definitely times where, I felt that my idea, if I brought it to the table, had an immediately reduced value because I didn't have a McKinsey stamp to say, well, I know this because of that. That's a bias that exists throughout, more in some cases than others, but it definitely exists.
Agreed.
So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I don't come from the background that come from the background that you have. My issue, the question is that have you come across anyone from the ethnic minority background with the I would say age? So I'm a startup. I literally started about 2 months ago, and the difficulty I'm finding is the age, And two is the finding the investors, because they're looking for younger people to kind of like, oh well, yeah, they're into their 25, 30, I can invest into them because they've got a great idea. But what about people who started late? Have you come across that?
Absolutely, and I think the reality is that it all goes back to the people like us question. So as humans, we're tribal copycats. We do what we see. So when we have good role models, when we have good people in front of us, we go, this is what I want to do, and we want to exist in tribal settings where we feel comfortable with people that are around us that have followed those same patterns. Absolutely, there is a challenge when you see the standard profile of a startup founder being a 25 to 30-year-old male with a certain set of educational background, with a certain set of network and understanding of the space they're working in, and then somebody else comes along that doesn't fit that model, might be equally as capable, if not more so in many cases. Your first instinct is to go, well, this is different. And we always take things that are different with hesitancy to begin with. No matter how open-minded we are, no matter how expansive we might be in our worldview, we always take things that are different as a little bit hesitant to begin with. So age is just another one of those factors. I have to say, it is changing a bit now. It is changing a bit now, particularly the age dimension is a bit less than it used to be. But I can tell you from personal experience and also from stories I've heard, a country founder for a venture I was COO in several years ago, a very prolific venture investor at the time, had an interview with this country founder, and she was in her early 30s. So she was, she's still very young, but at that point was a significantly different age profile from most of the other country founders we were finding. And the first question he asked her was, are you married? And the second question he asked her was, do you intend to have children? And a very prolific investor, I'm not going to name them. That speaks to the fact that there is a set of understandings that people bring to those conversations that go, well, people of this type, this age, from this background, from this whatever, will behave in this way, and as a result they can't demonstrate that hustle, that resilience, that whatever.
And oftentimes it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. It's absolutely flawed. It's absolutely flawed. It's the complete opposite. As far as that, I'm actually a child of first generation immigrants and Irish, and I'm an Irish Turk. Both my parents worked 2 jobs when I was growing up. My mum was actually a better earner than my dad and kept the family together effectively. Right? And had she had the opportunity to found something and do something amazing, I'm sure she'd have smashed it. Trust me, she's about as resilient and hard-nosed as you can get. All of that is nonsense, but it's different to our experience, or different to the experience of most of the VCs and investors that you'll speak to, because they're used to investing in that set of criteria. Right? 25-year-old, no ties, not married, no kids, is just going to do everything. They're going to live, eat, breathe, sleep this venture, and if they've got a great education, they've gone through maybe an investment banking process, or they've done something, then they'll figure it out. So yes, it does happen. I think the age thing is starting to change a little bit more. It's probably happening faster now than others. I've seen 3 or 4 ventures over the last couple of months where founders have been in their 40s and are still doing great things.
The second question was to that was, it's easy for you guys to, because you've been in the investment banking, you were able to find the investors. How do you get? The biggest problem is, where did you find investors?
Events like these and networking and finding your community, whether that's through the Atlantic Society or even basing yourself in a co-working space where there is that community and ecosystem and that hustle and other startup. In our early days, we would go to every event, and we even sneaked into a Bloomberg event that wasn't for founders at all. Some new investors would be there. So really, networking as much as possible and meeting as many people. And tell as many people as you can about your idea, because there will often be someone that may be able to help or introduce you to the right person. I think, when we initially thought of HANX, we felt guarded and didn't want to tell anyone because we were worried it wasn't the perfect product or what would people say. And actually, on reflection, I wish we told more people sooner, because it may have helped really brand out even quicker.
I have a question. So apart from perseverance, were there a couple of insights where you're like, wow, okay, I've just unlocked a step change in the fundraising process? What were your big quantum leaps on your journey through different raises where you're like, okay, this is something I've learned now that I didn't know at the beginning that really helped you?
Definitely on the marketing side, the first 18 months, things that we were able to learn on direct to consumer, especially being a sexual wellness brand where a a lot of our ads would initially get banned, and having sort of Sarah's experience as a guide dog to be able to pivot and amend that creative definitely helped. In terms of the step change of actual investors coming on board each time, it did help having a lead every time, for sure. But there was also that FOMO feeling once we'd have someone on board, we'd be like, well, I want to go, and when are you closing? And it quite quickly escalates with each round, but it does require that one lead that comes in. And each of the rounds, when I say a lead, it's been 2 or 3 people, and they've been friends, and then it sort of catapulted into that.
I wanted to build upon some of the points, Roger, that you're talking about. We generalize it to intersectionality, and we're talking about female founders, we're talking about ethnic minorities. If we bring our focus towards the global south, where we're just now seeing certain VCs set up and certain investments being made towards those areas, the challenges that are going to go there, seeing that the kind of the Western world, the kind of so-called, more refined and more sophisticated investors are still struggling with this. How are we going to even consider that the females in global south countries, which have such localized social problems which are unaddressable? And the reason I ask this is because I come from perspective and belief that social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship is a vehicle for large-scale social impact. And unfortunately, we're still seeing, even in the global south, we're seeing the investors going in only to copycat startups and not really looking at localized and nuanced solutions towards problems that are most difficult for people who are not representative, and even those that end up coming and immigrating to more affluent countries. So I guess a rumination I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on.
I mean, if I had the answer, I'd probably be there doing it. I actually think that the only way that this problem gets solved, not just in areas of the world where the investment landscape is more nascent and needs development, before we even get to how we fix it there, we have to fix it here. The reality is, as Farah said, less than 2 pence in every VC dollar that's invested right now goes to all female founded teams. I think there's a lot that we can immediately go, okay, what's going wrong now here? And then scale that up to figure out how we can fix it elsewhere. In my mind, there's a couple of key problems. The first is about education and giving young people in general, not just from underrepresented backgrounds, but from people who are in a position where they do not have any view as to how they can get access to capital, that even starting a business is an option. When I was growing up, starting a business was not an option. The school I went to, the people I was with, none of us had entrepreneurs as parents, none of us had people around us that could give us any kind of model that we could work towards to say, this is an option for you. That's exacerbated even more if you happen to be female. It happens to be even more so if you happen to be female and of an ethnic minority. All of those things at some point have to change in order to create some kind of traction so that young women can go, this is a real option for me. Now, until that starts to happen, it's always going to be incredibly difficult to create a world where you can redistribute venture capital funds or any kind of investment vehicles towards those kinds of founders, because they won't have the sense of belief or opportunity that everybody else in the market does have. I think the same is true in the Global South, right? The truth is that in order to really foster opportunity, those funds, that cash, that education has to start on the ground. It's not a top-down problem. It can't be solved by pouring cash in at the top. That will help at some point, and that has to happen too at some stage. But fundamentally, the change has to be a social and perspective change. And like I said, if I had a simple answer to do that, I'd already be doing it.
And I think that's when when we talk about these struggles and these challenges, now when you add geography and location, I think it's really important then to address this as a solution is to have more people involved from those communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially, you and I were working on another project here. Unless you don't, for example, if we were to take Saudi Arabia, for example, right? What we're talking about on the side. If there weren't enough women involved in the ecosystem as investors or mentors, there's absolutely no way you can actually lift that entire ecosystem up. And I think that's where you're coming in from, right? Where there has to be at a very grassroots level, and it has to be democratized.
Yeah.
Right? It cannot be a hierarchy, like you said, like a top-down strategy. It has to be a democratized way of reaching out to these people at a grassroots level where everyone is involved. And you see that in the US now more and more when I've been there. UK even less so.
Yeah, absolutely. I spend some time at a few of the local schools. So I still live in the area that I grew up in. And I spend time at some of the local schools. Unsurprisingly, one of the schools my children go to, which is state schools. And one of the things that have
has really struck me is that I had to go and approach those schools. You know, I had to go and say, hey, I'd like to come and talk to kids about, you know, what the art of the possible is. And because they just don't get told. They're still being fed this lie, this belief that, you know, you follow this standard path and you become this standard thing, and that's what people like you do, right? At some point they have to be shown, hey, I went to this school, right? And then guess what? I didn't do any of that, right? And here I am, and you can be that too, if you so wish. You don't have to. You could be something really different if you want, but that's an option for you. And at some point, that grassroots intelligence has to be grown.
But you've just compared a state school in the UK. I'm even talking about elite organization, educational institutes in the US.
Yeah.
So for example, our pilot experiment, whatever you want to say, it's actually our first partnership on the academy side of our business, where we've partnered up with Brown's University, which is an Ivy League. And what they've asked us to do is open up our membership to their students. Because even there, at their Center of Entrepreneurship, at their Nelson Center of Entrepreneurship, even at that level, they don't have access to a global community of founders, investors, and they're very, very siloed in campus life, where there isn't a lot of focus on minorities. I mean, it's Brown's in Providence, Rhode Island. You'd be hard pressed to find a minority, right? And for me, one of the biggest, and I'm not even gonna lie about this, my daughter is 2, and I wanted to do these university partnerships because I was like, you know what, by the time she's 18, now is the time to build these partnerships.
Absolutely.
Because getting into these institutions, nepotism is the only way to get in, if not means and merit at the end, right? So you have to build these relationships up. For me, it was sort of incentivized for that, but it was phenomenal because after Brown's, they introduced us to RISD. We have Duke, we've got UPenn, we've got USC, and on the UK side, we're still building up our partnerships. It's amazing how in the US even right now they're focusing on these, and for us it's really great, right? Because when I talk about having an open mind, and whether it's resources, whether it's education, whether it's information, what we need to do is breed this next generation of investors who can understand the problems, who can understand the location, product of minorities or female founders, and what better way to then actually have access to the brightest minds of the future. So I love working with next generation that way, similar to what you were saying.
I'm curious as to how you approach the problem of someone not understanding your products. Do you invest a lot of effort and time into that, or do you more so move on and then on to someone who will understand?
Yeah, so from an investment standpoint, we definitely try and bring across the brand and, you know, what we're trying to do, and it goes beyond the product as well. So we offer a lot of content and education in schools, grassroots, so we work with sex education partners, and then we also have a lot of content online in the community. So definitely helps if they understand that the brand side of that, and if they don't, we obviously explain that. And I think Sarah's background as well, speaking as a gynecology doctor, really helps investors understand what the problem is we're trying to serve, and that's beyond condoms. I mean, it started with condoms, and actually what we did is we built trust and authority in that category, whilst there was one main player for a while. And now that we've been able to do that, and with likes of Sarah on our co-founding team, we're looking to build brands, product, services, all the way from your first time, your first period, your first time having sex, to your first child, menopause, and beyond. But we can only do that if we can prove out our initial hero core offering, which is condoms and lubricants. So I think it definitely helps with them, but if they don't, obviously having that kind of backing and Sarah coming to pitches. And I think the other piece is different points at which people see the brand. So yes, we are direct to consumer, but we're also in all the major retailers, and we're the only challenger brand that sits on shelf today. No other brand has got on next to Durex. So people see us online through an advert, and then they see us in a Boots or a Tesco's, and then their times again, and then they see the content. It's the multiple times people see us that they start to understand resonate with the brand.
Do you think someone could understand your brand just from seeing the condom packet itself, or do you think they need to do further research into that?
Take that one. It's a good question, and it's a challenge for others pose, because no, I don't think you can get the brand from just looking at the product. It's discreet, and it's perhaps you might think it's more premium and things, but actually you don't get everything across at all. The real challenge we have, I guess, when we're kind of pitching the product is, like Barry said, bringing the whole brand into the picture and saying, actually, we're not just another condom brand. There's more to us than that, and these are the reasons why, and this is what we've done to show that. So yeah, and obviously there's different products probably can get more across just looking at packaging, but as a brand and like the feeling that we bring and the kind of like the tone and the relatability and all of that kind of stuff comes across through so many other touch points. Packaging is one, but just being on shelf has other benefits. It's a marketing tool in itself. It shows, for products like ours, it's really hard to make people move from a trusted brand like Durex. It's like, well, you know, might get an STI or get pregnant, and actually, are they okay? Are they legit? Are they, you know, obviously we give you all the same rigorous testing, medical, you know, approval and CE and all that kind of stuff. Being on shelf in Boots and these heritage brands, you think actually, okay, yeah, these guys are legit.
Can I add something to that as well? I think you do get the essence of the brand if you see the HANX packet beside a Trojan or a Durex or a Skin. Then you see very clearly what HANX are trying to achieve versus what everybody else is trying to achieve. So I don't think, you know, just the packet on its own, individually presented to you like that, shows the whole picture. But that point of differentiation really makes it clear that these are a group of people doing something fundamentally different to what everybody else is doing. I think in that context, and that's why the on-shelf presence is super interesting, because you clearly see it. You know, if you walk down the aisle and you hit that part of the fixture, you fundamentally tell that there is something different about these guys to everything else. You know, I think there's so much more to the brand than just the on-shelf presence. Like, you do definitely see it in juxtaposition to what else is there in the market.
Unfortunately, actually, this is all the time we have today here. Wanted to thank Greta Haley from 12 Bay Hill. Please ask them, you know, if you have any questions about the venue. It's beautiful, it's amazing. Thank you, Sarah, coming all the way. I know you're London-based, but thanks for rushing. Farah, thank you so much. And Roger, it's been very cool talking to you actually about all of this. We're actually have to clear this room out, but we're all going to go downstairs to the bar. We're all sticking around for a few questions, right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much.